Thank you for coming today to join us for this simple Anzac Day ceremony. I'm delighted today as well to welcome the Deputy Head of Mission from the Turkish Embassy. This is the first time that the Embassy has participated in our ceremony in Lisbon, so welcome. This year marks the 99th anniversary of that momentous day in 1915, when a group of volunteer Australian and New Zealander troops, the original Anzacs, waded ashore before dawn at a small beach on the Gallipoli Peninsula in Turkey to open a campaign intended to give Allied shipping access to the Black Sea, bring help to Russia, and perhaps pressure Turkey out of the war. By the time the Gallipoli campaign ended 8 months later, more than 8,700 Australians and almost 3,000 New Zealanders had been killed, and perhaps twice as many from both countries wounded. To those of other nations, it must seem strange that almost 100 years on, we mark what was, in reality, a failed military campaign. But for us, the importance of Gallipoli was twofold. It marked the first time that Australians went into combat as Australians, and it showed that in the face of adversity and potential defeat, the Anzac spirit, the courage, endurance, and mateship of all those who suffered during those terrible months could still triumph. The pride and grief of Australia, following Gallipoli, formed a bond so strong that it made a statement to the world that we had come of age, and that our armed forces and our people were now truly of one nation. The experience drew the nation together and continues to bring it together each April. But probably more importantly, by gathering here and in hundreds of other places throughout Australia and around the world on Anzac Day, we acknowledge that the sacrifice of those young Australians and New Zealanders on a small beach on the Gallipoli Peninsula 99 years ago is not forgotten. Nor is the sacrifice of the many thousands of young Turkish men defending their homeland. For we come together on Anzac Day to remember all those who have made the supreme sacrifice in war. We Australians remember not only those who fell at Gallipoli, but also those who died in both world wars, in conflicts in Korea, Malaya, Borneo, and Vietnam, and since then, while on service with international peacekeeping forces. Other nations will have their own rolls of honor. But for all of us, occasions like Anzac Day should not be a time to glorify nation and war. To paraphrase former Australian Prime Minister Paul Keating, because Gallipoli and the Great War of which it was a part was a mad, brutal, awful struggle, because the waste of human life was so terrible that it was hard to tell victory from defeat, and because the war, which was supposed to end all wars, in fact sowed the seeds of a second, even more terrible war, we might think these men died in vain. But this is not true. For out of the war came a lesson which transcended the horror and the tragedy. It was a lesson about ordinary people, and the lesson was that they were not ordinary. The soldiers, the sailors, and the nurses were the heroes of the war. They taught us to endure hardship, to show courage, to be bold as well as resilient, to believe in ourselves, to stick together. This is the heart of the Anzac story, a story of bravery and sacrifice, and with it, a deeper faith in ourselves and our democracy, and a deeper understanding of what it means to be an Australian or New Zealander. It is right, then, that we should take a brief pause in our busy lives to remember and to honor those thousands of individuals who have fought for, and in too many cases died for, a belief in country and in freedoms and in rights that are still denied to many people around the world. When speaking of casualties in the thousands, it's easy to lose sight of what each of those deaths meant. Each single death meant grief for many, a mother, a father, brothers and sisters, perhaps a wife, and friends. Each was a private and very personal tragedy. So allow me to finish with the words of John William Streets, who was killed in action on the first day of the Battle of the Somme on 1 July 1916. These words are taken from his poem, A Soldier's Cemetery, and for me underline the poignancy of battlefields the world over. When war shall cease, this lonely unknown spot of many a pilgrimage will be the end, and flowers will shine in this now barren plot, and fame upon it through the years descend. But many a heart upon each simple cross will hang the grief, the memory of its loss. Each new Anzac Day should renew our resolve to fight for a future in which those losses are a thing of the past, a future in which the world turns away from war and all it represents, the waste, the cruelty, and the suffering. Today is for honoring, remembering, thanking, and renewing, lest we forget.